This meeting is being recorded.
Yes, the meeting is being recorded. Welcome into the Three Guys Talking Ball podcast. We got a recurring guest with us today after there's some big news in Nebraska. We'll get a little bit here before I'll do my rundown. We'll break down the college football championship weekend. Got the playoff matchups set. The NFL Chiefs got a couple of Chiefs fan on this one today, so they're looking to avenge a loss. Talk about that. The Bison live to see another week, but we're gonna start off like we talked about it. That there's been some new coaching changes, and to help break it down, we bring on our good friend, recurring guest, voice of Memorial Stadium at Nebraska, Nate Rohr. Nate, how's it going? And before we get into it, as you can see, Grant has his Iowa stuff on, and since Nebraska has the better corn, the floor is yours. You can roast Grant away if you want.
Oh, hey, we have the better corn, and at least for 60 minutes, we have the better football team. I mean, the shocking part to me about that game was Nebraska basically out Iowa'd Iowa from the standpoint that they made fewer mistakes. And Iowa made a bunch, especially in the first half. And as it turns out, it was just enough for Nebraska to go out and get the win. So that was a pretty fun day after Thanksgiving. It's not what I saw coming. I worried that Nebraska would be out of gas. There were some significant concerns, especially at linebacker, about what Nebraska would be able to do defensively, but they hung in there. They got some takeaways early, and they were able to capture a victory. So I got to admit, the day after Thanksgiving was pretty fun at the expense of the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, and then after that, they got the new head. They got the guy they've wanted in Matt Rhule. What's kind of the word? What's your initial reaction to them going with Rhule as the next head coach?
Makes a lot of sense. I think his personality is very well suited to the Big Ten. He grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, and was a walk-on linebacker at Penn State. So his football DNA fits the Big Ten very well. Even his Baylor teams were very good line of scrimmage teams, good defensive teams, relatively speaking, to the Big 12 conference. So I think he'll be able to build the sort of teams in the Big Ten that can win. And I think we've really gotten an education over the last few years about the blueprint for winning football in the Big Ten. And in a lot of ways, our suspicions about Big Ten football have been confirmed. Line of scrimmage works. Having great offensive linemen, great defensive linemen, tight ends, guys with neck rolls on your defense, that works. That's what Michigan has. That's, the thought that Big Ten football was going away from the Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa blueprint and more toward the spread offense, Ohio State blueprint, I think has been dispelled. And it will be an interesting evolution for Ohio State because pretty clearly over the last couple of years, Michigan has shown the way to win in this league. And I think it's a more replicable blueprint for a lot of other schools, including Nebraska. So the fact that Matt Rhule's kind of geared that way anyway, the fact that the Big Ten is kind of swinging back toward that identity, I think bodes well for Matt Rhule's success in this league. I think he's already made some really nice headway in the state. People were wowed by his press conference a week ago today. And then he's followed it up by some impressive work on the recruiting trail in the state. And that's been a bone of contention among Nebraska fans because it's felt like a lot of talent has escaped the state's borders over the last decade. And that's part of the reason why Nebraska's fallen on harder times. I mean, Iowa took Noah Fant out of here. There are guys going to Oklahoma. And this is as talented a high school crop as there's been in this state. And so the idea that there isn't any talent here is not true. So Matt Rhule's really work to rebuild those pipelines, especially to here in the Metro and Omaha, I think all that will eventually pay off for him. But I think the large, 30,000 foot view of the reaction to Matt Rhule is overwhelmingly positive. It's not quite the rock star, gaga, head over heels that everyone was when Scott Frost was hired. But I think it's a very solid optimism that if he's able to do what he did at Baylor, Nebraska is going to be in good shape.
Yeah, is he still working on finalizing his staff? Is there going to be any guys that he's bringing back from the Frost staff? What does he all have as finalized staff so far?
Well, he's hired an offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield from South Carolina. He had a very good end of the season in his last 2 games. He's hired
out of a playoff.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, he was the closer. His Gamecocks were kind of the Grim Reaper to those teams' hopes of the playoff. So he's hired an offensive coordinator. He's hired a special teams coordinator. He has filled out basically half of his staff. He's got his strength and conditioning coach. He does not have a defensive coordinator yet. And then there are a couple of spots that are still up for grabs on the staff. There are actually, I guess, 5 positions. I think most people anticipate that those will get filled up pretty quickly because, of course, the recruiting calendar is so accelerated. The transfer portal opened today. Coaches could get out on visits this past weekend. So, as I mentioned, I mean, Matt Rhule was out and about. The other coaches were out and about. So there's some urgency. I feel like some things were held up because of the conference championship games. Now that those are done, I would be really surprised if this staff isn't almost done, if not all the way done, by the middle of this week.
Yeah. Oh, well, and there was some unfortunate events that happened with the interim head coach. Was there talk that he was going to be coming back before his incident?
It was at least a point of discussion. Matt Rhule brought him up during the media session on Monday. I think there were some plans in place to at least talk. I don't know I don't know where Matt Rhule was before the incident. Whether he was leaning one way, leaning the other, open to other possibilities. It's notable that the wide receiver position has not been filled to this point. So the wide receiver coach position, which tells me that there was at least going to be a pretty strong look given at Mickey Joseph. But with his arrest that occurred last week, I think that's pretty well off the table. So I think it was definitely out there. It was definitely something that could have happened. Now there's no chance.
Okay. What's kind of the vibe around Lincoln? Was there a lot of positive reaction to him, or there's kind of a little bit of a negative pushback, or what is the majority reaction around Lincoln, and then I guess on the broader spectrum, this whole state of Nebraska?
I think people are pretty excited. The week before, about Wednesday of Iowa week, or as normal humans would call it, Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, there was some discussion that, hey, Matt Rhule might not be available. Matt Rhule had kind of been, especially over the month of November, the leading candidate. And as we heard of some coaches accepting extensions, the big one was Lance Leipold at Kansas, because Lance had coached at Nebraska as a graduate assistant about 20 years ago. He had also worked off and on at UNO when they had a football program as a Division II. So he had some ties into the state. He had success at Kansas. There was some discussion that Lance Leipold would be a factor in this thing, but that went off the boards. And the name Bronco Mendenhall popped up middle of the week before the hiring of Matt Rhule. And I think that scared a lot of people. and I think it also, I think Nebraska stepped up its game and made sure that Matt Rhule would be coming here. Matt Rhule discussed that it wasn't a straight line path. The president of the university system, Ted Cotter, who actually knew Matt Rhule when Rhule was at Temple and Cotter was with the Naval Academy. He had to intervene and help this thing across the finish line. So I think the fact that Nebraska got Matt Rhule and not, somebody farther down the list was a positive. I think people felt good about the hire when it happened, when it was announced Saturday morning. I think people have felt better increasingly about the hire as he's gotten out there. He had a great press conference, as I said, Monday. I think people took a lot of energy and a lot of excitement from that. I was a little worried. The university made as big a deal as I've seen them make for a coach hiring, including the Scott Frost hiring. They invited fans to line the path from Memorial Stadium to the Hawks Center where they held it. They held the press conference in the Hawks Championship Center, the indoor practice facility, and not elsewhere in the stadium. And I mean, gosh, they walked out, they had the band going, they had pyrotechnics going, none of which they had when they hired Scott Frost. And I was a little worried that, hey, maybe Nebraska's overselling this, but I think it just added to it. And then I think the biggest thing that's really helped Matt Rhule in the eyes of Nebraska fans is he's gotten out in the state. He's been visible in the state. He went to Lincoln High School, first off. And I mean, Lincoln High is in downtown Lincoln, which is not far from the Nebraska campus. And they happen to have a wide receiver that had committed to Iowa State. And, the most recent Nebraska staffs have seemed to take the state of Nebraska for granted. And the fact that Matt Rhule and his staff made themselves very visible in going out and first visiting with Nebraska's the commits to this class that are from the state, and then secondly going into other high schools in Lincoln, in Omaha, and even outstate Nebraska to make themselves a presence. I think that was very valuable, and I think it's pretty important in rebuilding those talent pipelines back to the university and making sure that if there's a good football player in the Boulders, they play for the Huskers. Period. Amen. End of discussion. I'll give you an example. Gretna is an Omaha suburb. They finished second in the state this year. They won the state championship last year.
That was a crazy game. I saw the highlights on Twitter.
Oh yeah, ended with a 40-some yard field goal. The Gretna quarterback is going to Oklahoma State, and my understanding is Nebraska didn't recruit him hardly at all. And so that feeling that Husker coaches have kind of taken in-state talent for granted and undersold the in-state talent, that's something that I think Matt Rhule and his staff have been really intentional about fighting against and trying to dispel right now, to where the state's high school coaches go back to the old days where they said, if you're a good player, you're playing in Lincoln.
I'll let you guys ask. I've been hogging all the questions so far. So
what do you think was the biggest reason Frost failed? Like, Wisconsin's own guy, was it an ego thing, lack of culture, missing on the Nebraska recruiting? Like, what do you think was the biggest reason?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there were things that I don't know how well organized he was. You look back, especially in the early days of his program, his director of football operation, or his chief of staff, I should say, was a guy that hadn't worked in college football. And I don't think that was very helpful to him. I think, I don't know how well organized he was. There are all sorts of rumors and such about how he went about recruiting that, I don't think he was terribly well organized. I think he underestimated the effort that would be required. Recruiting, it's interesting. Nebraska, from just a pure recruiting ranking rivals standpoint, should have run roughshod through the Big Ten West. But because I don't think the staff developed talent terribly well and didn't have it very well organized, they fell well short. It was a situation where the sum of the parts was greater than the whole, which is not what you want. You want the opposite of it. I think there were some misses in recruiting that left Nebraska very thin. Nebraska had hardly any defensive linemen on the roster. And you think about that position. I mean, that's big guys getting ruled up on. That's a position where you need rotation. I mean, good teams are going at least 2 deep every spot. And Nebraska could hardly suit that up sometimes. So I think obviously there are a lot of things. And the other part is Big Ten football is well coached. It's football on the hard mode. This is not NCAA football, freshman mode. This is Heisman mode. And I think from a strategic standpoint, I think from a discipline standpoint, that staff just got beat and couldn't really get the program turned around in those respects. And then, once you start losing, the chatter and the momentum becomes negative, and it becomes very difficult to dig out of.
Yeah, Nate. I heard in Matt Rhule's opening press conference, Trev Albert said it was important we got someone who can build this brick by brick, and then in return, you saw what Matt Rhule did at Temple, and then Baylor, and how he got that 8-year contract. Is that something that you think Trev Albert needed to sit back and realize this could take a little bit? Let's give him some time with the length of this contract, and Matt Rhule is going to do it the right way instead of thinking, hey, this will be a quick fix. Let's change things right away here.
Well, I think that there is a pretty deep commitment to Matt Rhule, just, in terms of head coaching and also in terms of the resources he's getting. And yes, I think the length of the contract is a factor. You always worried with Rhule because he had a significant buyout with the Carolina Panthers. You had to make a financial statement and commitment that you wanted him, or else he could sit out. And I think Nebraska made it pretty crystal clear where they see Matt Rhule. As far as the length of the rebuild, I'm of 2 minds about it. I don't expect Nebraska to be in the college football playoff, in the next few years. But the tenor of college football, the setup of college football is such that it's as good a time now as ever to rebuild because of the transfer portal, because everybody, there's such a glut of talent. You just need to be very intelligent about identifying it, bringing it in, and developing it. And so from an organizational standpoint, I think Matt Rhule will be in a good place to get this thing turned around fairly quickly, at least to the point where Nebraska is an 8-win team. Where Nebraska is competitive in basically every Big Ten game, is in that upper third of the league, even after realignment occurs with the addition of USC and UCLA. So I believe pretty quickly Nebraska can get there, upper third of the Big Ten, going to bowl games basically every year. The question that exists in my mind, and sort of the longer haul of this rebuild, is how do you take it from 8 wins, 9 wins, decent bowl game every year to 11 wins, 12 wins, winning the Big Ten championship, competing for the national championship. That's the part I'm not sure on. Because I'm convinced Matt Rhule can get Nebraska to the 7-8 win level. The question is how much farther. And I think he'll get 7-8 wins relatively soon, perhaps next year.
Yeah, I was looking at their schedule. It sets up decently favorably for them. We'll see what he does within the transfer portal and guys he's able to retain and see how he finishes up recruiting because the recruiting is going to be tough because it's such a short window. And even though they did get on top of things hiring, it's still a lot of short turnaround to really get those guys that are kind of on the fence, try to get them overturned. But I think I watched his press conference, and you're absolutely right. He did knock it out of the park. And I think the one thing that stuck out with me with it was how he really connected with, I think, the Nebraska fan base. He talked about,
Mhm.
that's going to resemble the state of Nebraska, the process, the day by day, the hard work, the detail oriented people. And he wants guys that want to be Huskers and they want to be Nebraska men and they want to be able to honor that tradition and he wants to build something that the fans can be proud of and what they're spending money on. Um, and I think that's the best way to do it. I think if you
Mhm.
look at I think that's maybe what Nebraska got away from is, and you've alluded to it too, where they didn't want to recruit, or they took Nebraska, the state of Nebraska recruiting wise for granted, where he's gone more, I've seen him on Twitter a little bit now. And since I've gotten to know you, there's a lot of Nebraska stuff that just pops up on my Twitter feed. And where he was out in Scottsbluff over the weekend and like you said, going to Lincoln. Um, but it's the the culture and building that and getting guys that want to and understand the tradition of Nebraska. I think with NIL and
Mhm.
transfer portals and things like that, I think it's such a and it's coming true too. Where like you look at a place like Texas A&M, who threw the bag at a bunch of recruits, they're all gone.
Mhm.
Where I think this is the right way. And Matt Rhule, his if you look at his previous jobs, he's built things from the ground up and he's been able to maintain it. He's been at spots where they're not really destination jobs where I think this is where if he was able to retire outside of maybe James Franklin leaving or getting let go, I think
Mhm.
this is a place Matt Rhule would want to stay forever and retire here.
Well, you certainly hope for that. That obviously, I mean, shoot, as you guys mentioned, that's an 8-year contract. Let's see, he'll be pretty well along in his coaching career by the end of that contract. So, we'll see how much farther he goes past that. But if you do this job right, yes, it is a destination job. And, laugh at me all you want for saying this. This is a place you can win the national championship right now in this era of college football. Not to say that Nebraska is in a position to win it next year. Don't get me wrong, but there's not much that has to happen. And there's not much of anything that a coach has to do beyond just do right things with your program to get Nebraska in a place to win a national championship. You're going to have all the resources you could ever want. And the NIL thing's an interesting thing that you bring up because those efforts were fairly disorganized by all accounts at Nebraska in the years prior. There's a concerted effort being made right now to organize those better, because if they are well organized, that's a hell of a club to have in your bag as Matt Rhule. You're going to have the money to get the player you want. There is no salary cap at Nebraska. But at the same time, it is balanced with that spirit that you mentioned of we're not just going to go grab the next shiny thing. If a kid's good, if a kid fits our culture, if he fits our schemes, we're going to go after him and we're going to have the most competitive package for him. But he's got to be right for us. And so I have a lot of faith in Matt Rhule in how he builds things. I do wonder how the landscape of college football that changed a pretty fair amount, even in the couple of years he was in the NFL, will alter his timeline, alter his methodology in building a program. But if he's able to adapt to those, and I think he will be, Nebraska will be in good shape because this guy knows how to build a good football program, and he'll have the resources to take it even farther than he's taken a program before.
So Nate, we been talking about the transfer portal a lot here. Go back to last offseason. Casey Thompson goes from Texas to Nebraska. I'm just curious, what is does he have any years of eligibility left? Could he come back? Or would Matt, is he maybe going to dig into that to get his quarterback for at least the 2023 season?
That's
Transfer.
unknown. That's unknown right now. Casey Thompson does have another year, so he could come back if he chooses. But he's also, an older kid, and I don't know what he's hearing in terms of NFL possibilities. He also has some business ambitions. Casey Thompson is partially of Native American descent. He's talked about opening gyms on reservations to try and encourage the native population to be more physically fit, which has been a problem for them. And so, does he see now as the time to go in that direction? I don't know, but Casey does have another year to work with. I think we'll get a decision on that fairly soon. I think Thompson was treated pretty well here at Nebraska. He put out a pretty good year. He hurt his elbow toward the end of the year that I think really restricted him. But he was able to come back for the Iowa game, played very tough, stood in the pocket and led him to a win. So just guessing, and Thompson did attend the news conference on Monday. So if he was all the way out, he wouldn't have been there. And Thompson was quoted afterwards as saying, there are a lot of things that sound right with Matt Rhule, that sound the way I would want them to sound. So there's some alignment there. I don't know, what conversations have taken place in the last, week and a half, but it does feel like it's at least a possibility that Thompson returns.
Okay. Yeah, he was a good player. He's a fun player to watch. He's athletic. He can throw the ball well. What is something that you want to see with Matt Rhule? That's when Nebraska takes the field next year. What is something that you want them when you watch them on the field that you're going to be looking forward to see where they are the most improved?
I think just overall discipline. And, it's pretty simple. Penalties and turnovers. Do you limit the number of penalties you have? And for what it's worth, Nebraska cut back on those this year. But throughout the Scott Frost era, they would pick up penalties and they would usually be at the absolute worst times. So are you able to play fairly clean football? Some are going to happen. Who cares? But generally speaking, are you able to limit your penalties and are you able to limit your giveaways? Football's tough enough when you've got one opponent, the guy's wearing the different color jerseys. But when you're playing against yourselves and them, it's virtually impossible to win. So yeah, just don't give anything away. And hopefully down the road, if you don't give anything away, at some point you can take some things away and you can make big plays. But yeah, just eliminate as many mistakes as possible as quickly as possible, and then we can go from there.
All right.